Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Mass Retirees Weekly Update. Today's Friday, June 17th. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining with us again this week. I'm Sean Duhamel. I am joined today by our association's General Counsel, Bill Reary. We're going to give a preview, and some of you will have already received this by now, but we're giving a preview of our July 2022 edition of The Voice. It's our association newsletter. Literally hot off the press. It was mailed to all members a little bit earlier this week. So some of you, as I said, may have this already. So we just want to walk you through what the articles are about, what we're trying to accomplish, and give you a little bit of insight into what goes into putting this together. Now, if you're a new member of the association, you may not realize it or don't know by now that we produce the newsletter in-house. All of the writing you see is done by our staff, Bill and myself and the other members of our staff. We do have a graphic design team that works with us, but everything is published in-house. The actual printing takes place here in Massachusetts, down on the South Coast near New Bedford. There's a fantastic union print shop by the name of Standard Modern. We've been working with them for quite a while now. They take excellent care of us, and they're just a fantastic group of people. And I think the quality and the production value of our newsletter really speaks for itself. This is our main communications tool of keeping our members well informed and engaged about everything that's going on relative to your retirement, whether it be Social Security or health insurance or your pension or our legislative activities, Medicare, really everything that could possibly impact your retirement, specifically as a public or retired public employee, we write about in the newsletter, and this comes out 6 times a year. But before we jump into this, I have a couple of just news items I want to cover really quick. First and foremost, our association's legislative liaison, Nancy McGovern, has accepted and has started a new position going back into public service with the City of Lowell. Nancy is now an assistant to the new Lowell City Manager, Tom Golden. Tom is a former state representative from Lowell, just began his new position less than 2 months ago. Nancy was a key staffer for Representative Golden when she worked in the State House. So it's a natural transition for her as well as the representative. We wish Nancy all the luck in the world. We're very proud of her. As much as we are disappointed and saddened to see her leave, she's become a key member of our staff. We can't be happier for Nancy. And we just want to say, Nancy, congratulations. Thank you for the good work that you did on behalf of our association. And we'll miss having you here with us. But one of Nancy's big accomplishments that was just achieved, as she was taking on this new role, is the passage into law as what's known as the retiree work waiver. And for those of you who are public retirees and who have returned to either part-time or more recently full-time public service here in Massachusetts, you've been following this issue very closely. And Nancy, along with our legislative chairman, Tom Bonarigo, put a lot of work into helping to shepherd this issue through. And I also want to give credit to Jim Machado and the Mass Police Association, who have been close partners of ours in terms of all types of retirement legislation, but more specifically and recently working on this issue. And what this really stems from is throughout the pandemic, we know that a unknown but a great number of public retirees have been called back into public service to serve in all sorts of public service roles, whether it be at the state or local levels of government here in Massachusetts. Many of these individuals are continuing to work because of the public health needs during the pandemic. We still have a public health emergency here in Massachusetts, and really throughout most of the world is still under a public health emergency because COVID-19, unfortunately, has not left us yet. But in addition to that, the changes in the workforce and the demands in terms of finding qualified employees to fulfill these very crucial public service roles have really been a challenge. So many of our members have been asked to stay on at least through much of, if not the full calendar year of 2022, which would have created a problem in terms of the traditional law that's been in place for decades, really forever, for as long as the public pension systems have existed. There have been restrictions in place in terms of public retirees returning to full-time public service work. And over the years, we've been able to somewhat lessen those restrictions and allow for part-time public service work. And just last year, we were able to finally increase the number of hours that a retiree is allowed to work in post-retirement work in a public service role from the 960-hour limit that had been in place for quite some time to a new level of 1,200 hours. But the question has remained, what about the folks who have been called back into public service and are working full-time to help supplement the public workforce? The legislature and Governor Baker wisely have taken steps to provide for a waiver to allow both the hourly restriction and the monetary restrictions to be waived for 2022. This is the same situation that has really existed since the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. It continued through much of 2021 and now through 2022. The law that was just passed is Chapter 80 of the general laws, or of Chapter 80 of the Acts of 2022. That those provisions will continue either through the end of 2022 or within 90 days of the governor declaring that the state of emergency has subsided and is over. But given the fact that we're now in the middle of June, even if those restrictions were put back in place today, with just 6 months remaining in the calendar year, most, if not all, public retirees who are working in a public position should not run afoul of these restrictions for the year. But as far as we know, there is no immediate plans to lift the public health emergency. So we envision that those provisions will continue throughout the summer into the fall, and things can be readdressed at the end of this year, given the circumstances at the time. So this is going to be a big relief to our members who are working. I know a lot of you have been calling and emailing and so forth, and very nervous about doing anything that would put your pension in jeopardy. You want to play by the rules, and we're happy that we're able to help facilitate this change in the law and this waiver existing. But with that, let me jump into the topic of the week, which is the newsletter. And as I said, this is our main source of communication. It's a labor of love. I want to give a lot of credit, all the credit, to Bill Reary. In addition to being our general counsel, Bill is the editor-in-chief of The Voice. A huge part of his day-to-day is focused on the newsletter, putting it together, making sure we're staying on deadline, which is not always easy, particularly working with me. And I have a tendency to do my writing at the 11th hour when it comes to the newsletter. A lot of the issues that are in the newsletter are things that are ongoing, and they change really day to day or week to week. So some of these issues we will literally write about a couple of days before we're going to the printer, just so we're certain that the absolute most up-to-date information is contained in that edition of The Voice. But right on the front cover, the hot issue right now, the most important issue we are working on today, is the cost of living adjustment, the so-called COLA. And if you've been watching these weekly videos and reading my weekly emails and following the newsletter and listening to the hotline and so forth, you know that we're making progress on a few different fronts when it comes to the COLA. First and foremost is the action taken by the House back in April that would allow for or approve a 5% cost of living adjustment for state and teacher retirees for FY23. The Senate chose not to take that issue up and instead went with the traditional 3%. This issue is now subject to the ongoing negotiations that are happening right now between the House and Senate Conference Committee on the budget. We remain very optimistic that the House language most likely will be adopted, but nothing can be certain. So we have a full article on what happened with the COLA right on the front page. We want to give credit where it's due. House Ways and Means Chairman Aaron Mikowitz and the Chairman of the House Chairman of the Public Service Committee, Ken Gordon, helped us shepherd this through the process and got it to the point that we're at today. So that's a huge step forward. Also contained in this language, and this is critical, is a provision that will allow local retirement boards the ability, if they choose to increase the local COLA above 3%, so to pay between 3 and 5% for FY23. It is critical right now with the ongoing pressures of inflation that retirees receive some type of relief. Now, the second part of all of this, of course, is the COLA base, as well as what we're calling the enhanced or senior COLA. Both of those issues will be the subject of conversation on Beacon Hill this fall when the Commonwealth's pension funding schedule is revalued. Every 3 years, the schedule resets. FY24 is the next time the schedule will reset. The work on that starts to take place really in September of this year. We believe that the fund has done extremely well and that the money is there to allow for a modest increase in the COLA base. So that's what we're going to be working on. This is really a two-part process, one being approving a higher percentage for FY23, then working on the base and perhaps the senior COLA for FY24. We also, on the front page, and Bill's going to address this right now, we report on the success and the activity at the local level across the 102 local retirement systems when it comes to the COLA base.
Well, thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure to be able to address our members today. As Sean pointed out, we have not just the state and the teachers COLA, but we have the local COLAs. And there are 102 local retirement systems out there. And I take some pleasure in the fact that we're able to report on the bottom of page 1 that there has been significant progress at the local level in increasing the maximum COLA. That's really when I call it the maximum COLA, because typically you'll see that we talk about the COLA base. And what the base is, it's the maximum amount of pension on which the percentages apply. So we're obviously pleased to see that local retirement boards have heeded our message, heard our message, that in fact they should be doing something at this time, particularly with their earnings, the significant earnings that they made on their investments, that they should be doing something at this time to help the retirees, particularly in this inflationary period. I would also point out that the genesis of what we're reporting on the bottom of the page is this association. Over 10 years ago, 2010, we were able to have inserted into a municipal relief package language that allowed local retirement systems to go above $12,000 as being the maximum base. And over the years, and we've reported on this in our bulletin, over the years, local retirement systems have taken that provision and adopted it so that they've gone above the $12,000. But again, based upon what we were doing over the last couple of issues in highlighting these significant returns, and more importantly, calling upon local retirement systems to share in that success, we've seen a phenomenal number of local retirement systems, quite frankly, adopt a higher COLA base. In the bulletin, we report on 19 of those systems. But since we went to press, and I think, if I remember right, Sean, I think it was even that morning before we sent it to the printers, we were still updating the list. In addition, and so right now there's 19 in the bulletin. But after we went to press, we've heard from another 5 retirement systems that have increased their COLA base, and we expect that there'll be another one very shortly that will increase it. Again, we think too that we'll hear from some more boards that have in fact increased their COLA base, so that the number of systems from last year to now that have increased their COLA base will be over 25% of the local retirement systems have in fact increased their COLA base. We think this is great. And like I say, we're going to be reporting on updating the list in our September bulletin. There may be updates on the website, and there may be updates in hotline messages and weekly messages, but in September of each year, we report on local COLAs across the board for all 102 local retirement systems and also the state and teachers. That's our annual report on local COLAs. I expect that we'll see more retirement systems have been added on to that list from now until then. So again, it's great news. It's very positive news, and we hope, like I say, to have more retirement boards to be reporting on as the months go on. Thank you, Sean.
That is great news. And I think credit has to go out, of course, like you said, to our local retirement board officials, whether they be the elected members of the board, because remember, every retirement board is made up of 5 members, 2 of whom are elected by you, the members of the system. The other 3 or 2 represent the city or town government, and then the 5th member is appointed by those other 4 members. And it really takes a team effort at the local level to get these types of benefits approved for our local retirees. And I also want to give credit to our local members as well, not just the members of those particular retirement systems, but in many cases, we'll have retirees from either the state or the teacher system or another retirement system living in a community, and they'll show up at town meeting to help support their local retirees from the city or town that they live in. And it's really a concerted effort across the board for retirees looking out for and supporting one another. And I think, Bill, as you said, we have 25%, give or take, of the systems that we know of right now that have increased these benefits, and it's really because of the work that's being done. Another important process that's underway right now is the procurement process that the State Group Insurance Commission is currently involved in. As we have been reporting, all of the health insurance plans and the 2 pharmacy benefits plans that are managed and offered by the GIC are all up for renewal for next year. So that means that right now we're in the middle of a procurement process where all of those plans have been put out to bid. The bids for the health insurance providers, that deadline has passed. So whichever companies have bid on that work, they have submitted their RFRs to the GIC. The GIC is now evaluating all of those proposals. We have no way of knowing right now, how many companies bid, which companies bid. We don't know any of the details because it's a closed process. That's just the way the law works. The first indication that we will really receive in terms of where things are at going forward will most likely be in October. We might know a little bit more in September, but most likely it will be October and November when things will really start to take shape. But this is a really important process. The second piece of it is, as I mentioned, the pharmaceutical benefits. That process is underway right now. The RFR began on June 1st. So we're about 2 weeks into the process right now. It's a 45-day process. So these companies have until the middle of July to respond. We're not anticipating change taking place just for the sake of change, but you never know. So it's a key function of our association, a key responsibility for us to keep close tabs on this, not just for our members who are insured at the state level, but really for everybody, because whatever becomes GIC policy tends to very quickly become local policy as well. Now, at the same time, we're also very closely monitoring what's happening in Washington, D.C. Well, I skipped ahead, I'm sorry. Our legislative update. Nancy usually covers this, but Nancy unfortunately is not here. So I'm going to pick up the legislative update in addition to our 2 pieces of COLA legislation that we've already covered. We have another 8 separate issues that are pending before the general court. The legislative session, the formal session, of course, is over at the end of July this year, even though the legislature is going to continue to meet through the end of 2022 for all intents and purposes. Any kind of formal business, anything that requires a formal vote will have to take place by the end of July. We have a full report on page 6 of the newsletter on the bills that continue to be alive and well and in various stages of the legislative process. If there's something here that you have been personally following that impacts you, contact your local state rep and your local state senator. Ask them to help move it forward. There's not going to be a lot of time left. We have about 6 weeks, 7 weeks left of the session. So we're getting pretty short on time, and there's a lot of important work to do, not just on retirement issues, but other issues as well. I also want to mention in terms of legislation, we remain very actively involved in any activity at the federal level in attempting to reform the Social Security windfall elimination provision in calendar year 2022. We believe that we're close. We remain very optimistic. But as we say in the article on page 7, this really comes down to the need for a compromise between Republicans and Democrats over the future of how the new Social Security formula will be applied to future retirees. It's our understanding that that continues to be the major point of disagreement between Congressman Neal and Congressman Brady. They've each filed their own version of WEP reform. The two versions are very similar, but where they differ is how the new formula will be applied 40 or 50 years into the future. Now, obviously, our concern is what we can do to help current retirees, not worry about 40 or 50 years into the future. Who knows what the situation will be at that point. So we are doing all we can to help facilitate and encourage a compromise. We will be keeping you up to date on this. And we're doing everything we possibly can. And as we have said previously, if you have already contacted your local member of Congress, do so again. We have to keep their feet to the fire on this issue. Ask that they help facilitate a compromise to get a deal done, to get this onto President Biden's desk and signed into law in 2022. We're close. We do not want to see this opportunity slip away. And with that, we also have news at the federal level in terms of Medicare Part B that Bill would like to fill you in on.
Well, thank you, Sean. I should point out, I'm using the bulletin that my wife got today. I stole it from her so I could refer to it as we're doing this taping today. But Sean pointed out, I'm going to speak for a second about the Medicare Part B premium for this year. We've been reporting on the historical uptick in the Medicare Part B premium since last year, and indicating that we thought something should be done to provide relief, particularly since the Medicare Part B premium for 2022 was based primarily on a new Alzheimer's drug. And the expectation was that this drug would be approved for the general population, that in fact it was going to cost some a significant amount of money. And in fact, what has happened since we first reported on this last year is at first, Biogen, the manufacturer, reduced the cost of the drug in half. And more importantly, it was determined by the federal government that in fact, the drug would only be covered by Medicare for those who take part in clinical tests, not to the general population. With that news, we expected that the feds would take a close look at, well, wait a minute, maybe we should reduce the premium for 2022. Well, as we're reporting here, the latest update just before we went to press is that the HHS, the Health and Human Services Department, U.S. Health and Human Services Department, has decided to defer any relief on the 2022 premium until it does the 2023 premium for Medicare Part B. As we indicate at the very end of that story, again, we got it just at the last minute before we went to press, is that we're very disappointed by this. I mean, our people need relief now during these inflationary periods where we see gas over $5.
Yeah.
It would be nice if they could get some relief on the Medicare Part B now. We'll continue to watch this though. And if there's any further news, we'll obviously be reporting it either in the bulletin or in our weekly reports or on the hotline. Thank you, Sean. Oh, I was also, that's right. There's another Medicare issue that as I flipped the page, I realized that in addition to the Medicare Part B premium, we also have an issue that we've been following quite right now for the last 5 years. It's the Medicare buy-in program. And what that is that it allows local communities that are providing insurance to their which they should be, to their non-Medicare retirees under the active plans to, if they're 65 but not eligible for Medicare, to switch them over to Medicare. And we've called it the Medicare buy-in program. Well, we decided, it's been 5 years since the town of Ware originally did it, and maybe we should take a look and see how things are going. And it does appear that things are going very well in connection with the Medicare buy-in program, and there's really no problems. And again, you'll be able to read about reports that we've gotten from our members who serve on local public employee committees, whose town or city has joined or done this program, about the success of the program in their area. Again, they're operating very smoothly. We expect what happens is that new towns towns that may want to pick up this program. We usually see activity in the fall because they're lining up for July of 2023. So we expect that there'll be further updates later on this year on new towns that are going in cities that will be in fact doing the buy-in program. Now, I think you want me to say just a few words, Sean, about what the State Retirement Board has done?
Yes.
Okay. On the following page, and that's why I'm leading right into this, is a story about the work that our association president, Frank Valeri, has been doing in connection with the State Retirement Board. Now, again, what I'm talking about right now only involves the State Retirement Board. But again, as one of the 2 elected members on that board, Frank from the get-go has been pushing to see whether something better could be done in terms of getting a check out to new retirees. Our state retirees, unfortunately, and that includes my wife, experienced the delay in terms of getting their first check. If I remember right, I think it was at least 3, possibly 4 months before my wife Sue got her first check. But for some people, luckily, I'm still able to keep going. It wasn't as financially, didn't create the financial hardship that we know it has created for other state retirees. And Frank has heard from those members. And that's why from the get-go, he's been trying to do something to provide an estimated check to the 2 new retirees if they're not going to get their first check within 60 days. Mm-hmm. So again, you can read more about this, but I just want to avoid any confusion by our members. This action by Frank as an elected member of the state board only applies to state retirees, but it's a good step in the right direction, that's for sure.
And I should also point out that Frank has been working very closely with not only the staff of the State Retirement Board, but more directly Treasurer Deb Goldberg, who's the chairwoman of the State Retirement Board, as well as Teresa McGoldrick, who is Frank's fellow elected retirement board member. Together, they have been trying to address this for a while. It's a complicated issue, making sure that all of the records and so forth related to someone's retirement and different sources of credible service and so forth, that all of that is accounted for. But at the end of the day, the key focus here is to make sure that no one goes more than, as Bill said, 60 days without income. It's very important, particularly these days, more than ever. So it remains a work in progress, but it's something that we think is important, even though it doesn't affect our current members who are retirees, unless someone just recently joined. But we do frequently hear from members who are new retirees that went for a period of time exceeding 60 days when they first retired. And it's something that is important to Frank, that as should be, that he wants to make sure that this gets corrected. But just a couple of things before we wrap this up. On page 3 of every newsletter, you can always find a list of our upcoming Mass Retirees events. So whether they be teletown halls, which we are going to continue to hold indefinitely, these have been proven to be very, very valuable to our members, regardless of where you may live. But we're also going to start to hold our in-person area membership meetings. And you'll see in the newsletter, we have a full photo spread from our meeting that took place back in May up in Peabody. It was our first meeting since the beginning of the pandemic. We had about 200 retirees on hand. It was a fantastic meeting. It was great to see people in person. You'll see on page 3 that we have scheduled our annual meeting for Friday, September 9th at Lombardo's in Randolph. That will be our next in-person meeting. And we are now looking at potentially holding a couple of more in-person meetings here in Massachusetts before the end of this year. Look to upcoming editions of The Voice for further details on that. But our hope and our plans are that come 2023, we can get back to our full regular schedule of meetings all across Massachusetts, as well as getting back down to Florida early in 2023 to see the thousands of Mass Retirees members who are either full-time Florida residents or who are snowbirds. I know a number of you have reached out to us wanting to know when we were coming back down, and thank you for that. It just shows the value of our outreach. But we'll get back down there just as soon as we possibly can, to interact with members again. The last couple of things I want to point out in the newsletter, and really the last big thing, is an article that we did on some activity that took place this past spring. As you know, from if you've been following the newsletter, last fall, mass retirees called on the state and local pension systems to hit the pause button, so to speak, on any further changes to the assumed rate of investment return. The assumed rate of return is one of the most important, if not the most important factor that goes into the pension funding schedules in determining what the unfunded liability might be, and depending on or determining the payments of the budget appropriations coming from the state or the cities and towns to help fund the system. It all relates back to the assumed rate of return. The higher the rate of return, meaning the more money the system's going to make on average year in and year out, the lower the liability tends to be and lower the appropriation tends to be. The more conservative that number, that assumption, the more costly benefits become. And over the last decade, there has been a national movement throughout the United States to lower the rate of return. It used to be the rate of return here in Massachusetts was somewhere between 8 and 8.5%, with the state and teacher system traditionally having been at 8.25%. Today, over 10 years, we're now down to 7% rate of return assumption for the state and teacher system. We have at least one municipal system here in Massachusetts that is now below 7%. Now, if you look back over the past decade, the rates of return, the actual rates of return, the historical rates, have far exceeded what people predicted. Now, of course, every investment professional is going to tell you that past results and past history is not representative or indicative of future returns. We understand that. However, history can be instructive. And when we're now going through a point of cultural and economic change that's been brought about by the pandemic and all of the changes that have taken place in society, we really can't be certain right now of what the future might hold in terms of the economy and investments and rates of return. So what we have asked and what the state initially has decided to do, at least for the coming year, is hit that pause button. And PERAC, the state oversight agency for all the pension systems, voted earlier in the spring at Frank's urging, and Frank had the support of Jim Machado, who at the time was the public safety representative on the commission, from Rich McKinnon, who represents, and he's the president of the Professional Firefighters of Massachusetts. State Auditor Suzanne Bump joined the cause and also called on PERAC to hit the pause button. And that's exactly what PERAC did. They voted unanimously to recommend that no further reductions in the rate of return be approved for the coming year. And it's something that everyone's just going to keep a close eye on. And we think that this was a very important step forward, that we don't want to be more conservative than is needed, but we also don't want to be more aggressive than what is called for. There's a balance that needs to take place. And I think for right now, we believe that that balance has been achieved. So I just want to say thank you to PERAC for listening and taking steps in the right direction. One final thing before I turn it over to Bill to talk about the last article. We've also written an article in terms of, for Social Security, weapon GPO. A big part of what we try to do, not just on this issue, but really with all issues, and it's a major focus of the newsletter, is to educate members as well as policymakers in terms of the facts behind whatever the issue happens to be. And when it comes to weapon GPO, these are complicated, emotional, volatile issues that are really hard at times for retirees to wrap their head around what it really means. And there's also a lot of misinformation out there about what weapon GPO are, how they came to be. So from time to time, we like to include and write about just a factual piece to dig a little bit deeper. And in this case, we did a primer on how weapon GPO work. I want to thank Bill and Nancy McGovern for putting this together. But if you are a newer retiree, or even if you're have been with us for a while and you're not really sure what weapon GPO are all about, how they work, why they exist, give this a read. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. After you read it, we're happy to walk you through it and answer any questions you have. But Bill, I'm going to give you the last word on our content here. We have a great article about an initiative that Treasurer Goldberg's office has undertaken with the Office of Economic Empowerment.
Well, thank you, Sean. And yes, and on that educational function that we perform in our July bulletin, we did a piece, an article on a glossary, really, of healthcare terms. And the reason we did that is sometimes, we're dealing with it every day, and when we write things, we might forget that, we have members that may not be as familiar with the terminology or what we're talking about, have a background in it. And so that was the purpose for the glossary story. And that's really the purpose of the story that we have on the windfall and the GPO in this bulletin. And it also, we'll have more of that in future issues. That's what I just wanted to pass on. But the article that Sean is referring to is a spotlight that we did on a program that the state treasurer, Deb Goldberg, started. And we think it's a great program. And that's why we wanted to spotlight it in this issue. Why? Because what the program does, and it's called the Office of Economic Empowerment, what it does is it basically provides, one of its main functions is to provide free financial education to not just retirees, but to all residents of Massachusetts. But the thing is, it seems that's very important these days, that maybe that members tap into this and see whether or not they may get some useful information as to how to address the current challenges that we all have with inflation. What we do provide, and most importantly, at the very end of that story, we provide all the contact information that a member may need to get a hold of this office. Again, it's something that we think that at a minimum, people may want to take a look at. And hopefully, if you do, you find something there that'll help you out. Thanks. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Bill. And I hope this gives everybody a little bit of a deeper dive. I know it's been a little bit long, and if you've watched us all the way to the end, thank you for tuning in to the end. But please, if once you receive the newsletter, give it a read. It's something we put a lot of work into. It's for your benefit. We do have our weekly message, our hotline, and our website, our Facebook page to get out breaking news to you when it occurs. But the voice continues to be and will remain our main source of communication with all of you. So with that, thank you so much, and we'll be back to you again real soon. Bye-bye.